Hi, welcome back.
Welcome.
In this episode, Vaneet and I are going to be talking about representation. So we're going to split this topic into two because it's such a huge topic. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about negative representation. So characters that portray bisexuality really poorly. And in next episode, we're going to be talking about positive representation. So some of our favourite bi characters and storylines. So Vaneet, do you want to start us off with?
Yeah. So, I think the thing is representation is really important, and I think it's quite lacking for bisexual people. So for me, a lot of the representation that I saw wasn't necessarily portraying bisexuality as negative. It was more playing out this very similar storyline of you're straight and then you're gay. And I think for me that was quite harmful because I then only ever saw straight and gay, and it was a very binary representation of what sexuality was. And the complete lack of ever trying to make a character that's bisexual meant that I never saw bisexuality as something valid. I never learned what bisexual was, and when I finally did, I didn't see it as valid because of that lack of representation. So one of the most noteworthy ones was Willow within Buffy. So Willow was straight initially within the first few seasons, and they had multiple relationships with men or crushes on men. So they had a long-term crush on Xander, and then they were entered a long-term relationship with Oz. It was around, I think it was season 4, is when they first kissed a woman, and their actual line when they did so was, "Oh, gay now." And that is a representation of a lesbian person, and that is a valid representation of a person who exists within LGBT plus communities. But I feel like that could have been a very prime example of bisexuality, and they just kind of decided not to, and I think that's a recurring theme within a lot of different representations.
I really like your point about how that's a very valid representation of a lesbian, because for a lot of people they do have that eureka moment. I know that we spoke last episode, or actually the first episode, about how we didn't have those eureka moments, but some people do, and it's important to represent that. But yeah, like you said, it's the binary view of sexuality that you're either gay or straight, and if you're straight and then you kiss someone of the same gender, you go to being gay. If we look at the Glad We Are on TV report, I don't know if you've ever looked through those. But GLAAD has been tracking LGBT representation on TV for I think the last 20 or so years, and one of the things that's been consistent across their reports is that bi people have way fewer characters on TV than gay men and lesbians. So obviously gay men are like the most represented on TV, and within the LGBT community, obviously gay men are not the most represented people on TV, but within that community. And then it's lesbians, and then bi people have much lower rates of representation, and then obviously trans, non-binary people have almost no representation, which has been consistent for like the last 20 years. Things are improving, and there's a lot more bi and trans people on TV. But yeah, like that bi erasure is really harmful because, like you said, it just leaves young people especially not being able to see themselves and their realities like reflected back to them in the media. And so it doesn't leave any space for people to see those experiences and then help them find the words to describe themselves.
Because for me, I was at that age where I was quite confused because I was experiencing bisexuality, but that term could never entered my vocabulary, as I mentioned. And I feel like that would have been a really nice place for them to have done that, because for someone to go from having these experiences with men to having these experiences with women, it would have been a really nice time for them to go, oh, actually, she likes both. And they just didn't give that space. So me watching that and going, oh, I'm having these feelings for men, and seeing, oh, she has feelings for women, that makes her gay. It's like, well, that means I'm gay, and that just made my whole headspace quite frantic. So yeah, I feel like that's quite a negative representation. I have another one, which was Teddy within 90210. So Teddy was Teddy came onto the scene of 90210, which it's a garbage show. Like, it's the new 90210, and it's a complete trash TV, but I enjoyed it. And I think that when Teddy came on, they were with all the women. They had a relationship with pretty much every woman in that show, just like most of the men in that show, to be honest. And most of the people in that show in general just had a relationship with everyone, one of those shows. But what happened is Teddy got drunk one night during this party. I think they just split up with one of the partners that they were like fully in love with until the next one. And they just split up with them and they went on this massive drinking spree. I think they also had some accident as well, so they couldn't play tennis, something like that. White people problem. And they got really drunk and slept with this man. They didn't know it was a man because they just slept with someone. They woke up in bed, looked over, saw that they just slept with a man and was like, oh no, what's happened? And I remember having this conversation with my housemate at uni at the time because we both watched it together. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And they were like, that must mean they're gay then. And that was the point where bisexual had entered my vocabulary, but I wasn't seeing it as something as valid because why would I when I haven't seen it anywhere? And when my friend said that, I used this as an opportunity to maybe try and bring this out. And I said, well, what if they're just curious, or that they're actually bisexual or something else? And she immediately shut that down because she reinforced the binary for me. She was like, well, no, they've had sex with a man. That means they're gay. There's no coming back from that. That's the end state now. You've had sex with a man. How can you possibly go back? And that was then my mindset. It's like, if I slept with a man, if I did anything with a man, if I ever engage those kind of feelings, that means I'm gay. And so I just denied it because I was like, well, it's one or the other, Vaneet. There's no middle ground. There's no fluidity. There's no way to express anything else. It's straight or gay. Choose one. So I thought that was quite damaging.
I think as well, for me, as someone who's a womanish person, which is a story for another day, the other problem with representation that I found was that if bisexuality was ever shown or explored, it was in really negative ways. So it was in ways that were very sexualized, ways that were kind of played off as a joke, ways that were like made the character villainous almost. So my example is that I was obsessed with Scrubs as a teenager. So in Scrubs, the characters that are represented as kind of being bisexual are Elliot and the Todd. And both of them are pretty bad representations. So for example, the Todd is played off as being like really hypersexual. He sleeps with anything. He kind of harasses people. And then for Elliot, her attraction to women is always played off as kind of a joke. So like in one episode, she talks about how she let her roommate think they were dating in college. And then the punchline is that the roommate was a girl. And then later that episode, we see her flirting with a woman in the bar, but it's also kind of like played off as a joke. So for me, as like a teenager watching that, I kind of internalized this idea that like, if I was like flirting with a woman or like dating a woman, it was kind of just like a joke, really.
Yeah.
Like no one was going to take it seriously, and like eventually I would end up marrying my JD. I would end up marrying a man. And the same with the Todd. Like I internalized this idea that bi people, especially bi men, were like really hypersexual, that they slept with people of different genders because they like could never be satisfied with one gender, that like they were going to harass people, that they were just... He was a really bad character. So that was like another way that the representation was really negative. Like bisexuality either didn't exist, like you said, it was very binary, straight or gay, or if it was ever shown, it was to make the character seem really villainous. So one example of like really villainous characters was from Cruel Intentions, which was a bizarre film. Like looking back on it, it was this film where this brother and stepsister are like trying to seduce this girl that the stepsister teaches. Really weird. And so the stepsister in that obviously was portrayed as kind of being bisexual because The reward was that, like, if the brother could seduce this girl, then the stepsister would sleep with him. Like, it didn't make any sense at all. But she was played off as being, like, this really villainous, like, cheating, conniving character because she was, like, trying to sleep with this girl and then she was going to, like, sleep with her stepbrother. Bizarre. But that was another representation of bisexuality that I saw as a teenager where I was like, well, if I'm bisexual, that means I'm going to want to sleep with my stepbrother? Like, it was just so weird. But again, that was, like, one of the only films that I saw as a teenager where, like, somebody was bi and it was used to, like, make her seem like a bad person. And I think that stereotype, like, still exists quite a lot. Like, I think that film came out in the 90s, maybe? That still exists on TV now, where, like, bi characters are really, like, conniving and villainous. Like, a lot of people are saying that the new BBC Dracula, which is really bad anyway, that, like, he's kind of bisexual in that, and that it's used to make him seem more, like, evil. So even, like, in 2020, we're still having bi characters being played off as, like, the villain.
Yeah, I think I saw something on Dracula where he's not bisexual, they use some other term.
Bi-homicidal.
That's the one.
I lost it when I saw that. I was like, Stephen Moffat, shut up. Because, like, I'm about to be bi-homicidal and you keep talking like this. It was so weird.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, you mentioned Todd, and I was obsessed with Scrubs as well. And I just remember that he would just constantly make comments towards the men, but it was always kind of just brushed off as it's the Todd. He has sex with everything. He's just, like, sex one-minded person. And I think I watched an episode, because it's been running on, like, 4Music for some reason. Music channel plays Scrubs for some reason. And I think there was a scene where he actually, someone of the characters was talking about, like, hiding the gayness or something like that. And he was like, I can relate to that. And it was very much that idea of just, you could easily make this character bisexual, and you could easily just make him a normal character, instead of just making him so one-minded about sex. But I think it's very much playing to that sitcom trope as well, where you've got to have one character who's just all about the sex. You know, you have Neil Patrick Harris in How I Met Your Mother, you have Joey in Friends, and you have Todd in Scrubs. But it is that idea where Todd in Scrubs took it to the extra level because it was, well, how about we make it funnier, like chucking him in attraction to men as well. And it's just very troubling because we don't have any, I don't remember seeing any representations of bisexuality at all growing up. And it was just the idea of, well, you're either straight to gay or you're straight to gay. I like that. Or you just have sex with everything. It's just one or the other. And it was very disappointing, really. There's positive representations now, but that's for another episode, I think.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about representation in, like, mainstream TV and film. But what about in, like, LGBT media? So my example of that would be when I was a teenager, I watched the film Lost and Delirious. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, I haven't.
It's like this lesbian film from, I think, early 2000s. And it was really important to me when I was coming out because I found it on YouTube, like the whole film. And it was like the first time I'd ever seen, like, two girls be in a relationship. And I was like, it changed my life. But one of the characters in that is, like, a typical kind of biphobic stereotype because they get outed to her parents, and she decides that she can't take, like, you know, the homophobia, and decides that she's gonna be with men now, and so she leaves her girlfriend and kind of cheats on her with a man, and then spoiler, but the girlfriend kills herself. It's not a good film. But that was, like, my favourite film when I was a teenager. And then I, like, watched it again, like, a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, this is, like, really biphobic. Like, but I just completely internalized that idea that, like, yeah, bi girls, if the going gets tough, they'll just cheat on you with a man and leave you like, fine, I just completely took that to heart and like didn't even realize. And I think like LGBT media is getting better in terms of how it treats bi people, but like it was not good. Another example would be Piper in Orange is the New Black. Like that is great for a lot of like LGBT representation. You know, you've got trans characters in there, awesome, lesbian characters. But then Piper, the main character, is like obviously bisexual. And it took them, what, 5 seasons to say the word bisexual? Like, in the first season, she's like, I just like hot people. And, like, if you don't use labels, that's okay. Like, great. But, again, she was played off as, like, a character that cheated all the time. She was a character that was, like, really flaky and couldn't be trusted. And it was just another representation of how, like, bi girls are evil. Or, like, bi girls can't be trusted. So I don't know if that's the same in like media for gay men. I actually haven't watched as much as I should have.
So I do know one example actually. I actually wrote about this one because it's everyone's favourite show, Glee. And I'm sure we all know Blaine within Glee. What's his name? And he is a gay person. He is from the other school, and Kurt gets into a relationship with him. And they end up becoming quite friendly, even though they were like rival groups at the beginning. But the problem that happens there is, again, it's a drunk story. So it's an episode all about them drinking, and Blaine gets really drunk, and they're doing, I think, spin the bottle, and they kiss. And he ends up kissing Rachel. And the next day, he wakes up from, like, they're hungover and whatever. But he ends up questioning his sexuality quite a bit. And he talks to Kurt about it, and Kurt is really dismissive of it. And he's like, bisexual people don't exist. Bisexuality is just a thing that people say in order to feel more accepted, to feel part of the group, and, you know, be in relationship with women to hide themselves. And he starts saying stuff to Blaine about him going back into the closet and stuff like that. Massively dismissive of it all. And Blaine starts getting quite confrontational with Kurt, like, how can you act like this, whatever, what have you. But at the end of it all, Kurt ends up being right, because Blaine then kisses Rachel when he's not drunk to figure out whether this is a thing, and goes, oh, nothing at all. And even though like they were trying to portray Kurt as this person who was saying a lot of terrible things, Kurt is that kind of person who doesn't actually care and thinks his opinion is above everyone else's, and thinks of himself quite highly. And I feel like that would have been a good way to knock him down a level of like Blaine actually coming out as bisexual, and maybe going through a journey of realizing that like he's not the pinnacle of LGBT plus just because he's a gay man who's somewhat feminine, that there's other things out there who are maybe more oppressed. But instead, they just go into this thing where Kurt ends up being right all along, and sometimes you're drunk and you kiss someone and you have that little questioning thing, but it's just because of alcohol. Yeah. It's just because of alcohol. There's a song about that as well, isn't there, where people didn't like the song, I think it was Rita Ora.
Oh my god.
Because it was just like, I get drunk and sometimes kiss girls. And again, it's replicated with Teddy as well, but instead it's the other way around, where he comes out as gay. But it's this idea that alcohol is the thing that fuels everything. And it's just like, sometimes you don't need, it's not about alcohol. It's not about alcohol fuels all your sexual experiences.
Yeah. Our sexual trope, it's called.
Yeah.
I actually got into a fight with a lot of people about the Rita Ora song. So some people do like rely on alcohol to help them like explore their sexuality, and that's like a really valid way of like exploring, because sometimes you need to have your inhibitions broken down by inebriation, and that like helps a lot of people. And Rita Ora actually had to like come out and label her sexuality because of like the backlash from that song, which I was just like, if she doesn't want to label her sexuality or like come out, we should just let her do that. Like, I get the trope of, you know, getting drunk and kissing girls is really harmful, but also telling bi women that like you have to, I think it was Hayley Kiyoko said that she was like, damaging what it meant to be gay by like writing this song, because her experience like looked different to a lot of other like gay and bi women's experiences, and that's just like not cool in my opinion. Like, you can be a slut, you know? You can be a slut, you can drink and make out with people, and then you don't have to like explain yourself, and you are not responsible for like sexual violence that happens to other people.
Yeah, I think it's a really troubling ground, because when you don't know someone is from that community, and then they're using that kind of experience and putting that kind of stuff out there, sometimes it can be quite hard to navigate, because it is like, on the one hand, it is a valid experience, but on the other hand, if it's very much that I'm straight, but sometimes I get drunk and kiss girls, it kind of falls into that trope of what bi women are, where it's just, oh, we're doing this for the male gaze, and we're doing this for a little bit of fun. So it's a really hard social ground to navigate of what that means in terms of the larger scope and how that then affects communities.
I think that's the difference between like Katy Perry's I Kissed a Girl and Rita Ora's Girls, is that one was like very much, Katy Perry's was very much about doing it for the male gaze, like hoping your boyfriend doesn't mind it, cheating on your boyfriend. Whereas Rita Ora's was more about, you know, sometimes you get drunk, you feel a bit flirty, you want to kiss girls, you want to maybe have threesomes. Like, if threesomes are your thing, that's awesome. They're not everyone's things, they're definitely not every bisexual woman's thing. As much as people think they are, they're not, but like, if they are your thing, great. And I think like something this comes down to, and bringing it back to what you said earlier about Buffy, where it's like that can be a good representation of like lesbian experiences, is that if we had more representation overall, we would have more space for like messy bisexual people, bad bisexual people, as well as like good representation by people who know exactly who they are. Whereas because there's so little representation at the moment, we need it all to be positive in a way. Like, there isn't enough space for us to have like bad bisexual people who aren't bad because they're bisexual, they're just bad and bisexual.
I think it is very much that, like when the conversation is happening on such a small scale, it's really hard for us to be putting nuance into it. Like stuff like Willow, for example, you can have a very nuanced conversation about the importance of that versus the importance of bisexuality, and talking about like the different ways that we can have this kind of representation. But it's really hard to have that when that's all there is. When the conversation is constantly straight to gay, it's really hard to say, well, you know, there's nuance to all of these different experiences when that's the only experience that's ever been shown. And I think the same thing falls into those two songs. It's when the conversation is always getting drunk and kissing girls, when there's never songs about just kissing girls because you want to kiss girls. It's falling back onto that area where it's always about, you only do it when you're drunk. So it's hard to have conversations around it because there's not enough. So we do just need more representations.
Yeah.
And I think that can be the topic of our next video.
Yeah, next
the positive representations within media.
Yes. So thank you for joining us for this episode of the AmBIssadors, and we'll see you next time for positive representation.
See you.
Bye.